Praise the Lord. Welcome to the Front Runner Podcast. I am your host, Isaiah Marshall. The month of May is not only my birthday month, but it is also Mental Health Awareness Month. And today we have a special front runner joining us, my friend and fellow Avenger, Dr. Andrea Mata. We call her Dr. Dre. We have titled this episode From Murder to Mission, which is the title of her TEDx Talk. Listen, once you listen to this episode, please do yourself a favor and watch her TEDx Talk, which can be found in the show notes. You will laugh. You will probably shed a tear. However, you will be inspired by her story and her message. In this episode of the Front Runner Podcast, Dr. Dre shares her powerful story of how she made art from the broken pieces life caused her, and how she found her life's calling from a very tragic and traumatic experience she had. Here is Front Runner, Episode 9. Praise the Lord. My name is Isaiah Marshall, and you are listening to Front Runner, my podcast, where I will be interviewing friends who are front runners, the underdogs who dare to take risks, who bet on themselves, who run their own race, who run to win. They lead their lives from the front, and as they sang in track and field, they leave it all on the track. Let's go. Welcome to the Front Runner Podcast. I am your host, Isaiah Marshall, and today we have a front runner with us.
Hello. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me on the show. I went into my own podcast voice there.
It's all good. So we met each other about 2 years ago at an influencer event, and we've been keeping in touch. I know you've been doing some very important work in the lives of others as a clinical psychologist. And I just appreciate you being on.
Well, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So let's start here. Tell us a little bit about Dr. Andrea Mata. Like, what was your upbringing like? What is your story?
My story. So Isaiah knows this, but I do not share this story with very many people. I keep this story typically very close to the chest. I've shared it on my own podcast, and I have felt nudges, maybe some gentle nudges, maybe some more forceful nudges to really actually tell my story. Because a lot of the time when people have me on their podcast and they're like, oh, tell me your story. And I kind of like tiptoe and I'm like, oh, like this is it. And then I leave out like the biggest part. So
wow.
I'm not doing that today.
Hey.
I'm going to give you the full story. So my upbringing, I was born and raised in the south side of Chicago. So gang infested territory. It's 9 blocks big. I remember growing up, and the funny thing is it's the same neighborhood where my parents met.
Wow.
So they actually met a block over from where the house that I grew up in, because my dad immigrated here from Mexico when he was 22 years old, and he just happened to move in next door to my mom, and then they fell in love and then had 3 boys, and then 7 years later had yours truly.
Wow. Okay.
They had to wait to get me. And so grew up in this family in this gang infested territory. And I would always wonder, like, why am I turning out a certain way? Why are my brothers and I turning out of one way? And a lot of my peers are turning to the gang, are turning to drugs, are not doing well in school.
Wow.
Like, what is going on here? And it was something that I always kind of like wondered, because I remember like one of my best friends growing up, she just came from like a bad family, and I was like, and she wasn't doing well in school, and it was like, what is going on? And then I got my answer when I was 13 years old. And so 13 years old, I remember sitting in a courtroom, and I had just spent the morning in the courtroom, like the courthouse, like cafeteria,
Mm-hmm.
because they wanted to protect me from seeing all of the riffraff. That's what my
Mm-hmm.
parents called it, like the riffraff.
The
Like we
riffraff.
don't,
Okay.
they don't want, we don't want to expose Andrea to like all the other cases that go through before like our case. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay. So I remember like sitting in the cafeteria and having like bad courthouse, like cafeteria food.
Yes, yeah, I imagine.
And then they pull me in with the
Mm-hmm.
person that was like kind of hanging out with me, protecting me from the riffraff. And I remember, and I take the witness stand
Mm-hmm.
at the age of 13. And
Wow.
my mother had already, so the DA, the district attorney, had already read my two older brothers' impact statements.
Mm.
My mother had already taken the witness stand and read her impact statement. And then I took the stand to read my impact statement. And I talked about how this crime like impacted me and impacted my family.
Wow.
And the defendant didn't even look at me. As
Mm.
soon as I took the stand, I like looked straight at him, and he just kind of like put his head down, didn't look at me for the whole time that I was speaking.
Mm.
And so then after all the impact statements are read, the judge goes in the back and he's thinking about like what he wants the sentence to be for the defendant.
Mm-hmm.
And then he comes out. And I remember sitting there between my mom and my dad. And again, my brothers were not allowed in the room for various reasons that we can get into later.
Okay.
And I remember sitting there and I'm holding my mom, like my mom and I are holding each other's hands just so tightly. And the judge like scans the courtroom, pauses his eyes on my parents and myself, takes one of those deep breaths, like, and then he delivers my life mission. And he says that even though all the criteria for the death penalty have been met in this case, it's not due to his moral or professional, or what's the word I'm looking for, moral, or let's see, what was it that I was looking for, like a objection to it. So it's not
Mm.
due to a moral objection, it's not due
Mm-hmm.
to a professional objection. It meets all the criteria for the death penalty, but he cannot sentence the defendant to death.
Wow.
And he goes on, so they say like, and then he goes on to say like why. And he says, I cannot sentence this person to death because they had a bad childhood, a
Wow.
childhood that included neglect and abuse and violence and trauma. And so therefore he will not be sentencing this person who took the life of somebody else, my brother,
Mm.
my best friend Cisco, to death.
So you're 13 years you're a 13-year-old. Like
Uh-huh.
how did you process that? Like, because you
Yeah.
grew up in this environment where it's gang infested, violence all around you, and then this traumatic event happens, and then you're sitting in this courtroom and the judge gives you this. Like, how did you process that as a 13-year-old?
I remember sitting there just utterly flabbergasted,
Mm.
being like, wait, so you mean to tell me that because someone had a bad childhood,
Wow.
that they are, not really, but kind of, sort of allowed to engage in an unthinkable crime,
Yeah.
to violate one of the big 10 commandments,
Mm.
like thou shalt not murder.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
because they had a bad childhood, because they didn't grow up in a family like I grew up, that
Yeah.
we were close knit, we were sarcastic, I was always protected, I was always loved. We weren't financially well off, but we
Mm-hmm.
were always provided for.
Wow.
That he kind of gets off because of this bad childhood.
Wow.
Just utterly flabbergasted. But then, like I said, that gave me my life's mission.
Mm.
And so now I became a clinical child psychologist
Yeah.
who specializes in the development of antisocial and aggressive behavior.
Wow.
And now that's what I treat, or that's what I
Yeah.
predominantly like to treat. There's a lot of anxiety going on right now. So, in
Yes,
case.
it is.
So
Yes, it
I
is.
do quite a bit of that. But because all of my clients now, every
Mhm.
single one of my clients, even my anxious clients, even the couples I work with, they are either that murderer as a boy,
Mhm.
and I'm just trying to prevent another 11-year-old from losing her best friend.
Wow. How were you resilient? Like you're young, you're growing up in this environment. How like what helped you be resilient in that time?
I think it really, honestly, it's the family. Like, I go
Mm,
back to it is the family. Like, I know, I remember like my parents setting really good expectations like, hey, you are allowed to go out in this gang infested territory, but you have to be back at this time. Or you have
mm,
to check in every 30 minutes. And
mhm.
if you don't check in, like we're coming searching for you.
Wow.
And I think the other big thing, and this is funny because it's the other major line of my research, is that I was a three-sport athlete my whole life.
Wow.
So like where I was engaging in like travel softball ever since I was 8, because that was something that I valued. It was something I enjoyed. It was something that I was good at. My
Mhm.
parents wanted me to pursue it. And so they allowed me to do it as much as we financially could.
Mm.
And really think, and it took me away from the gang infested territory. And
Wow.
so, like, it gave me a positive outlook, and I was able to see and witness other people and surround myself with other people who weren't in the gang life or
Wow.
weren't in bad families
Yeah.
and that were coming from, for the most part, like positive, high functioning, high quality families.
Wow. So the family dynamics kind of helped you persevere and be
Mm-hmm.
resilient. And then the sports.
Yes.
Wow. So I know like in my background growing up in Detroit, which is a similar
Yeah.
environment, gang invested, violence all around. And I know for me being a track and field athlete, that was something that was yeah, it was like a safe place for me.
Yeah.
And something else that it did is that it helped me see because we traveled a lot. Just like you mentioned you were in
Mm-hmm.
travel sports. We traveled a lot and it helped me see that there was more than just that environment of Detroit, Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And it helped me
And that
dream.
you could get out and that
Yeah.
sports was a way, because we were good athletes, sports was a way to get out.
Yeah. So you serve as a clinical psychologist. So how does your experience inform like the way you serve like your clients? Do you think that there's a correlation there or
Oh, absolutely. So cuz I know that I have no doubt in my mind. I don't know a lot about the person who murdered my brother.
Mhm, mhm,
Like his background,
mhm,
but all I know is that it was, there was neglect and there was trauma and conflictual relationships. And so all I'm doing is I'm trying to help my young clients
mhm.
develop individual coping skills
Yeah,
so that whatever is thrown at them, they can handle, that they can be resilient,
yeah.
that no matter what adversity comes their way, they can overcome it through using coping skills. I'm also really focusing in on couples, like relationship skills.
Okay.
So those are kind of another big pillar that I focus in on, are relationship skills. So I've been working a lot with couples. And then another one is parenting, because parenting is huge. And I have no doubt in my mind, had the person who murdered my brother
Mm,
received individual coping skills, relationship skills, and
yeah.
good parenting when he was growing up, instead of this crap that he received, he would have never murdered my brother.
Wow.
And so that's how I kind of approach it. And so I envision it. I try to put things in like a visual, as much visual as I possibly can, but I
Mhm,
talk about like building my client's fortress. And so
mhm.
it's like a three-sided fortress, one with individual skills, one with relationship skills, and one with parenting skills. And if I can help my clients and my couples and my families build up their fortress,
Mm.
well, then ain't nothing going to break them down because it's a damn
Wow.
fort.
Yeah. So that fortress helps them cope and adjust to whatever traumatic things that they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Because what's going to take down a fortress?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's powerful. I'm just intrigued and just like taken aback. It's like you mentioned how when the judge came out and he read his verdict or that
Mm-hmm.
that he spoke your life's mission.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I'm as a poet, one of the ways that I process things that's going on in my life, whether it's traumatic events. So like when I lost my dad back in 2018, was I wrote about it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that helps me is through writing poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And I often go by this sort of tagline is that when life breaks your heart, make art with the pieces. And so
Mm-hmm.
poetry, in a lot of ways, is my way of making art with broken pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like you, even as a 13-year-old, was able to make some art with broken pieces because you experienced this traumatic event
Mm-hmm.
in your life, losing your best friend, your brother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you were able to be resilient, you were able to persevere, and now you're helping those individuals who have the potential of being like that person who murdered your brother,
Mm-hmm.
but you're helping them, you're serving them so that they won't do the
Mm-hmm.
same thing. And so as a clinical psychologist, you're essentially, at least for me, it seems like you're making art with broken
Mm-hmm.
pieces.
Yeah.
And you're helping other people to do the same.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yes. So you've overcome some things. You've
Of course.
overcome trauma
Mm-hmm.
and you're helping other people overcome trauma. Now, in this process of becoming a clinical psychologist, like how exactly did that come about though? Like did you just all of a sudden at 13 like, hey, I want to be a clinical psychologist? Like how did that come about?
No. So I remember like I am so glad. There are so many times that I am so glad that there was not social media when I was a kid. Because if there
Yes.
was social media when I was a kid, like I don't think I would be as successful as I was. And the
Mm,
main reason why I say that was because I remember when I was in sixth grade. So my brother was murdered when I was in fifth grade
mm,
in April of 1995. And I remember, and I still remember to this day, it
mhm,
was like sometime in September of 1995. And I was at the playground in our neighborhood
mhm,
and I was hanging out with my friends Diana and Nina. And all of a sudden, this guy and that I had known my whole entire life. Like I grew up, like I've known him since kindergarten.
mm.
And he came up to me at the playground because I don't even know how it started, but all I remember is him saying, like, I'm going to murder your other two brothers.
Have mercy.
And I was like, what? And like, not, I had no emotion regulation at that point. Cause remember, it's only like, what, like 4 months, 5 months later,
Mm.
after my brother was murdered. And so, like, I remember, like, I ran, cause then he like started to bike away. And so I ran after him and I remember I like knocked him off his bike and I just started
Wow.
punching and kicking. And like, my two friends had to like pull me off of him and then
Mm.
like he like ran away and then like we just kind of hung up at playground and then probably like 20 minutes later all of a sudden he comes up with his dad and his dad's like where's Andrea and I'm like that's me and he's like why the hell did you beat this why'd you beat up my son and so I told him what he said and he looks
Mm.
at him and goes you deserve that he's
Wow.
like why would you say that
Yeah.
and he's and then like as they turn around he's like I can't believe you got beat up by a girl um, so there was some time where like I had to kind of process things emotionally.
Mm.
And I remember it really, and then like I remember in sixth grade, I had to do like a book report or like a
Mm.
career report on like what I wanted to be when I got older. And I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I was like, no, I don't want to be a lawyer. Like that is not for me.
uh,
And then I remember it was like my senior year of high school and
mhm.
I was like, okay, do I want to be a psychologist or do I want to be a psychiatrist? I knew I wanted to help kids similar to the person who had murdered my brother.
Wow.
but I didn't know whether or not I wanted to go like the MD route, which would be mostly prescribing medications, or if I wanted to go the more therapy route. And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, I remember I talked to my AP biology teacher, and he was like, Mata, because they all call me Mata. He's like, Mata, he's like, go the psychology route. He's like, you do not want, he's like, you don't want to be in like, he's like, you just don't want to give medication. I was like, you're right. Like, I don't want to just give kids
Mm.
medication because that's not going to help. That's not going to help the kind of kid I wanted to help.
Yeah.
So I decided to go the psychology route, and I actually never looked back from that moment.
Wow. Wow, that's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. You found your life mission
Mm-hmm.
and now you're walking in your purpose.
Yes, every day.
Every single day, helping
Every day.
helping families, helping children to
Mm-hmm.
navigate life, be resilient, persevere through traumatic experiences that they have. That's very important work, especially as one who serves students in ministry.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And as you mentioned, anxiety is high in these young people, and so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I appreciate the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So you've overcome obstacles. Let's think about like risks you have to take to get to where you are now. Like what would you say is some risk you had to take to become Dr. Mata?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest risk I had to take was that I had decided from an like junior senior year of high school that I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to go for my clinical PhD. And at
Wow.
that point, like I didn't realize how challenging that was.
Yeah.
I later, so then like getting into college, it wasn't challenging. And when I was in college, they were like, oh yeah, you're high caliber, blah blah blah. And I remember my senior year being like, I'm gonna go to a top 40 like clinical psychology program, ha ha ha. And then I remember I applied to 13 schools, and I got an interview at one, and I went there. And it was funny because I was like, the school was predominantly like took like interviewed people for the clinical PhD program
Mhm.
that who had already had their masters. And so I
Okay.
was like one of two people who were like coming straight from undergrad, and the other one
Wow.
was from Yale. And I was
Oh
like,
wow.
oh, what the hell am I doing here? And
Wow.
then like I remember being at there, and she's like, you do realize that like getting into a clinical psych PhD program is like the second hardest program to get into in the nation. And I was like,
Wow.
what? I was like, and I did not get into that school, but then I got another interview at the Kent State University, and that's where I ended up going. Um,
Straight out of
but I would
undergrad.
straight out of undergrad.
Wow.
So did 4 years of undergrad and then went in and did 6 years of graduate school and came out, Dr. Andrea Mata. So, but I think
Wow.
that was a risk because like
Yeah.
if you think about it, like less than 1% of people, the general population has a PhD. And then
Mm-hmm.
if you look at Hispanics with PhDs, that's even lower. I
Mm.
think it's like 0.7% of like Hispanics have I think it's probably even lower than that because I think it's only like 1%, 1.7% of his PhDs are Hispanic. So
Mm.
like I thought that was a pretty big risk.
Wow.
Um,
That
but
is.
because it's like, what if I wasn't good enough? Then like I just kind of put all my eggs in one basket to kind of do this. And I remember I had a backup plan my senior year of college that I was gonna, if I didn't get into grad school, I was just gonna go and work at a daycare.
So if I'll get into PhD, I'll work at a daycare. That's fine.
I remember going into my undergrad advisor, and I was like, I haven't heard from any place. She's like, you have to be patient. And I'm like, I'm not patient. And she's like, you have to be
Wow.
patient. And I'm like, do you think I should start applying to daycares? And she's like, what?
That's
She's like, you
amazing.
just spent 4 years at a small private university. You're not going to go work at a daycare.
Wow. So you're an overcomer. You
Mm-hmm.
take risks. You bet on yourself
Yeah.
because, as you mentioned, it's rare for
Mm-hmm.
someone to come straight out of undergrad and go to a
Mm-hmm.
PhD. But you took that leap of faith
Mm-hmm.
and you bet on yourself and you did it. And so
Yeah.
one of the things that I've learned in the sport of track and field is that this concept of a front runner
Mm-hmm.
is a front runner is an overcomer. The front runner in track and field is the underdog because the odds are stacked against them. They're not expected to win.
Yeah.
And but the front runner is one who takes risks, who bet on themselves, who run their race, who run to win. They lead from the front
Mm-hmm.
and they leave it all on the track. And it sounds like in your story, and what you're doing now, like just how you're a front runner. I see you as a front runner. You took risks, you bet on yourself, you overcame obstacles, and you ran your race and you ran to win.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as an influencer, I know sometimes, we get into this thing where we see other people doing, they're doing things, and sometimes we start minimizing the things that we're doing. So how do you keep yourself from falling into the comparison trap?
Ooh,
And
that's a
how do
great question.
you essentially, like in track and field, how do you stay in your lane and run your race?
So one thing that I really focus in on, so I have like these five, I'd say like 4 or 5 values that I kind of live by.
Yes.
The first one is my probably the most important one to me. And I remember when I was a college professor for 9 years, my closest colleague Adam and I would always joke because we'd get frustrated with students. And what we would always go to, and this is my number one value, is like, just give a shit.
Mm,
Like, if you just give a shit, take pride in what you are doing and what you are putting out there, the
yeah.
rest will follow. And like, you just have to believe and you have to trust in that. So,
Yeah.
first and foremost, put yourself out there, take risks, and see what happens. The
Yeah.
other one, it's funny that you asked the question, is because like I was like, my second value is like, stay in your lane.
Wow.
And so, like, you will see, and I will talk like when I'm like posting things on LinkedIn or Instagram or
Mm,
Twitter or whatever, I am talking about mental health. I'm talking about parenting, relationships, um, and like coping skills and
mm,
maybe some sports psych just because I've kind of gotten into that, but that still goes back under like like relationship skills and mental health and coping skills. So like I really focus in on that, and I actually I have to check myself because I get agitated and frustrated when I see other people stepping outside of their lane. Like when you have
mm,
someone who's like, "Oh, this is like my area," and then they're talking about parenting, and I'm like, "Why are you talking about parenting? You have like no background or training or anything in it." Like I was listening to a radio station, a local radio station here, and it just came on, and it has like one of the DJs, like I think he's hilarious, and he's like I think he's hilarious, and so I was
mm,
listening to it, and then they're like, "Oh, this section with Dr. So and so," and I'm listening, and I'm like, "Okay, so she's talking about relationships, and like people are like writing in for advice, and she's answering it," and I'm like, "I don't necessarily agree with that." And they're like, "Oh, doctor blah blah blah." And so I decided to like look up this doctor that they had on the show, and
mm.
like they have like no, like they are a doctor, they have a doctorate degree, but it's not in anything like relationships or mental health or
Wow.
anything. And I'm like, that you're just a fraud.
Mm,
And so I was like, I'm not listening to that radio station anymore, or
wow.
that radio show anymore. So like stay in your lane,
Mm,
because like I
mm,
think if you can talk about what you are passionate about and what is in your lane, I think you can speak more clearly about it, and you can speak more passionately about it, and
yes.
you're genuine and you're authentic and all of those things.
Wow.
Um, Another big one for me is like play nice in the sandbox. Like life is better when you're around people and when you
Yes.
have people coming along with you. That's why I love our group, Isaiah, because like there is, I don't even know how many of us there are, like 10. There's like
Something
10
like
of us.
that.
Yeah, like 10. Like, I mean, we could count, but like, if we're, let's just say there's 10, but like we're all in it to help each other out,
Yes.
because being an entrepreneur or being an influencer, whatever you want to say, it can be lonely.
It can
But
be.
like,
Yeah.
if you have people and you play nice in the sandbox and you're just kind to others, then it's going to be returned to you like fivefold or what have you.
Yes, yes, yes.
So that's my other one. And then the other one that I switch back and forth is I go like play the game or like be a good soldier. And so that just
Okay.
means like figure out what's expected of you, figure out like what are the rules, what's the expectations, and then just go kill it. Like go and dominate. I remember I mean, you know, but the audience doesn't know. I was an assistant high school football coach this past season, where I was on the sidelines and I did like sports performance stuff with them.
Hey.
And I remember I had a conversation at the beginning of the year with one of like the six, seven guys that I was working really closely with. And he was struggling because he was not seen as a starter. He was seen
Hmm.
as a leader, but he wasn't seen as a starter. And he
Wow.
was getting really frustrated with that. And I remember just telling him, I'm like, play the game. Like, you show up day in, day out,
Yeah.
do your best, stay in your lane, give a shit. And as soon as you get your opportunity, kick the door down.
Mm.
And guess what? He then became like probably like our best linebacker by the
Wow.
end of the season because as soon as his opportunity came back, he kicked that door down and like he just dominated. I was like,
You gave him a good pep talk.
yeah.
That's
And so
awesome.
yeah. And so like when you have like an 18-year-old boy like his last game and he's like giving you a hug and he's like, I love you. Not in like a weird creepy
Right?
kind
Yeah,
of way,
understood.
but like
Yeah,
I love you. And I'm like, I love you too.
yeah. He needed that.
Yeah.
That's
So
awesome.
those are kind of like my rules to live by.
That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. Now, one of the things that I like to do is I like to close out with some heart questions. And so I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions and you just kind of answer from the heart. And so when challenges arise in your life, who or where do you look to sustain you and help you get through?
First and foremost is my person. My person is my husband. He is my ride or die. He is my person. He is my best friend. If you ask him if I'm his best friend, he will say no, but that's a whole other story. That's a whole other topic. But like he is the person that I will go to because he is fully like he's on board. He will tell me when I'm being ridiculous. He will tell me when I am doing awesome. And so when I am struggling with something, I go to him. If I don't go to him, I go to my dad, because I'm a daddy's girl, and he's similar to my husband. He will like shoot it to me straight. He'll look at me and be like, "You're only
Yes.
cheating yourself, Miha." And I'm like,
Wow.
"Okay."
Wow.
So yeah.
Wow. Now, what are two things you appreciate about yourself?
Um, my superpower of building relationships. I've been told time and time again, and that's actually why I got my internship at Boys Town, which is working with some of the most antisocial and aggressive teenagers in the nation.
Mm.
Is that I remember sitting there on the very first day of my internship with five other interns, and Dr. Pat Fryman comes up and he stands in front of us, and it's like, oh my God, it's Pat Fryman. And he looks at us, he's like, I don't care what any of you guys have done before this moment. He's like, the only reason why any of you guys are here is because you're good with people. And so like that's what I cherish about myself or appreciate about myself is that I'm able to build relationships with people very, very quickly, and kind of I'll have them trust me very quickly. Um, I think my other one, what do I appreciate about myself, is that I am all about family. I mean, it's my life mission. So
Yes.
like I'm genuine in it. Like I'm not like one of the like I love my kids. Like
Yeah.
and yesterday, if you saw the post, I
I
was covered
saw.
in milk, poop, and syrup. And then today we're like cracking jokes in the morning. And so
Wow.
it's like, and and I love my husband. And so I think those are the two things that I appreciate about myself is that I can build relationships very quickly
Mm.
and that I truly am genuine and that I am family oriented.
That's awesome. Now, how important are friendships and community to you?
Oh, so important. And I have, so here's one of the and I don't think I've ever talked about this. And so I actually really struggle with friendships.
Mm.
And I have a very close circle. and I'm not very trusting of people. And the reason
Mm.
for it is because the person who murdered my brother actually considered him a friend.
Wow.
And so, like, when I've kind of looked
Have
back on that,
mercy.
I'm like, why do I struggle with friendships? And it's like, oh, because at any given point, like, a friend could murder you. I
Have
mean, and that's
mercy.
irrational. I realize that, but that's what happened to my brother. Is that it
Mm.
wasn't like a random act of violence. It was like this guy was legitimately my brother's friend,
Wow.
and then he murdered my brother.
Mm.
Um, and so I really struggle with friendships. I have two best friends. I've had them since college. They were my college roommates, and
Oh,
we
that's awesome.
still like back in August, we went on like a pod trip. That's what we call ourselves, the three P's in a pod. And so I'm very close to them. And then, yeah. And so then I try to find friendships where I can. And
Yes.
then in regards to community, we a lot of the time, like, it's via our church pretty much. Like, ever since
Yes.
I quit being a professor and talk about risks, I forgot, I should have mentioned that. Like, I was a tenured professor, which meant I couldn't be fired.
Wow.
And then I quit that job to be a full-time clinician. So that's a huge risk.
That is
And I
huge.
lost a lot of my community in that. But then
Wow.
I really sought out community in the people that we go to church with.
That's awesome. That's
Mhm.
awesome. Now, what is bringing you joy right now?
Bringing me joy. Today was telling jokes with my kids.
Just joking.
Um, just joking. Like, they're just so silly because I mean I have twin 5 year olds and I have a 3 year old. And so it's like the little kid jokes that don't make a lick of sense. And then they ruin the joke, like the knock knock jokes where you're like interrupting cow, who, like who? And then you say, like, you interrupt them and say like moo or boo, yeah, moo, but like they don't get that you're supposed to interrupt the person.
Yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah,
then they just say moo at the end, and then
yeah.
you're like, you don't get it.
But those are some sweet moments.
Those are.
Wow.
And like, because we did it this morning, like we were, cracking jokes before we got ready. And then right before bedtime, they're like, can we joke around some more? And I'm like, sure. So we all cuddled on the couch
Wow.
and we told the same three jokes over and over
That's
again.
awesome. That's awesome. It's amazing how, even saying the same things is just,
Yeah.
that's entertaining to them. And that's,
Yeah.
they enjoy that and appreciate
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Now, what does winning look like and what does it mean to you?
Winning. Winning looks different. So it's like when people ask me, like, define success, and I was like,
Mhm.
how long do you have? Winning just looks like setting your goals, like
Mhm.
setting your mind to something
Yeah,
and being able to achieve it. So, like, I decided starting in 2023, I want to get back into running triathlons. So I
oh
did a
wow.
triathlon in 2015, and then in 2016 we started IVF with to get our twins. And
Mhm,
so
mhm.
doing triathlons was not allowed. And so I'm going to get back into triathlons, and we're going to set that goal to, every year for as long as I possibly can, do one triathlon in a different city every year.
That's awesome. I always want to do a triathlon. I have to work on my
You should
swimming though.
totally do it.
I got to work on my swimming though. Like
You know what we could do?
what's
We
that?
could decide on where we want to do a triathlon, and then we could do it together.
We
And
could,
you would totally like smoke me
but that
in the racing. I would probably smoke you in the swimming,
yeah, that
and then
swimming
we just have to
intimidates
like,
me.
and then we'd have to figure out like who's better on the bike.
Well, yeah, right, right. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
That'd be fun. That would be
That would be
awesome.
fun.
Maybe that
Mhm.
that yeah, that could be a goal.
Mhm.
But I do have to work on my swimming though. I know how to swim, but it's like the hood swimming. You know what I mean? Like I can't. I never
Oh, I do
learned.
not even want to. That is a that is that is a very like touchy subject, because on internship that was like the pivotal moment, because Pat Fryman, who I was just talking about, was like,
Mhm.
why aren't there, and he did like pose a question, and he posed the question of like, why aren't there any well-known black swimmers? And people started like answering, and some of their responses were not very okay.
Right.
And so like the two interns who were African American, like they got offended, understandably, based off of some of these answers. And so
Yeah.
whenever
Yeah.
someone like mentions like hood swimming or like black people not being able to swim, I'm like, I don't want to talk about
You
that.
say you don't want to get no parts of that. So I learned how to swim. I mean, essentially getting pushed in the pool, like
Yeah.
by relatives. It's like, hey, you sink or swim. and
Yeah, that's how I learned how to swim.
that's
I think
what
it's
I'm
a
saying.
minority way to swim. Like that, if you're a minority, like that's how you learn how to swim.
Yeah,
Your
it's like
father probably threw you in the
trial
deep
by
end
like,
and
hey.
said,
So I know how to swim, but I got to work on it though.
okay, we'll
Well,
find you. Nashville's a big place. We could totally find you a swimmer. Hey, listeners, if you can teach Isaiah how to swim for a triathlon, you give him a call.
Hey, I welcome that. I welcome that. I appreciate it. Well, Dr. Mata, I appreciate you joining us. I appreciate you just sharing your wisdom, your story. And I know that the listeners will be edified, they'll be challenged, they'll be encouraged and empowered through your story and what you share, your wisdom that you shared. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. Now, how can the listeners follow you and find you?
I am on all the social medias, unfortunately. Not really. So mostly Instagram. I do some Twitter. I do have a TikTok, but I think I only have like one video on it. And so it's Dr. So DR and then DRE. So Dr. Dre and then Mata, MATA. So Dr. Dre Mata is my handle. And then on LinkedIn, if you are so inclined, then it's just Andrea, spelled like Andrea, Mata, MATA.
That's awesome. Again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
If you've ever felt like an underdog or that the odds were against you, be a front runner. Take the risk, bet on yourself, run your race, run to win. Jesus sets the race before us, and we win by running with and for him. This has been the Front Runner Podcast. Until next time. Follow the Front Runner Podcast and share with a friend. Also, follow me on Instagram at the Isaiah Marshall. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, which can be found in the show notes. And while you are at it, be sure to check out all of my released spoken word poetry projects anywhere you stream music. Thank you for supporting my creative journey. This is the Front Runner Podcast. Until next time, blessings.
I'm out front running, underdog, but I stay underdog. I take my risks, that's why I beat the odds, running. I'm out front running, I'm out front running. I run and win, that's why I run with him, no looking back. I leave it on the track.